In this video we're going to look at bouncing off surfaces. So I'm going to start off by choosing something that looks a bit more bouncy than a cat. So I'm going to delete the cat. I'm going to choose a new sprite from the library. So I'm going to go for something from the sports section. There we go, ball. That's a bit more bouncy than a cat. So we looked at movement in another video. So we could, if we get our program to start when we click the flag, what we'll do is we'll just keep going forever. We'll repeat, we'll move our sprite 10 steps, and if we wanted to get it to bounce, there is a tile that says if on edge bounce. So if we run my program now, what will happen is it'll move 10 repeatedly and it'll check whether it's on the edge, and if it is on the edge it'll bounce. Now by default sprites always point rightwards, so it's going to move off to the right and it'll bounce backwards and forwards like so. So what I'm going to do to give it a bit of a better bounce, I'm just going to point it in a random direction to start with. So at the top of my program I'm going to point it in a direction, and rather than using 90 I'm going to use the random number tile from the operators section. So if I point in a random number from 1 to, remember it's degrees, so it goes all the way around, so 360 is the maximum possible number. So now if I run that program it'll move off in a random direction and it will bounce nicely off the sides. So we've got this tile that says if on edge bounce, but unfortunately if we want to bounce off other things there isn't a bounce tile. So there's no tile that just says bounce, and we've looked at we've looked at detecting other things using the sensing section, so we can detect whether we've touched things like the mouse, other objects or particular colours, but what do we do if we have actually hit them? How do we work out which way to bounce? Right, so what we'll do is we'll put something on there to bounce from. So imagine we wanted to restrict the area in which this ball was going to bounce. So let's put some grass on the backdrop. So I'm going to just put some grass on there like you might see on a tennis court, and let's see if we can get the ball to bounce on the grass. So at the moment what it's going to do, if I run it, it's going to go through the green because it's only bouncing when it hits the edge. So let's have a look at how you would think about how we're going to work out how to bounce it. So if we're bouncing off a horizontal surface like so, the ball comes down at an angle, and if you draw a normal to that surface, so a line at 90 degrees, we can measure a thing called the angle of incidence. And so when it bounces off, the angle of incidence is the same as the angle at which it bounces. So this is very much like light or other things that bounce that you might have come across in your science lessons. So this angle over here on the right hand side is the same as the angle of incidence, and I could go into the detail of how to calculate this, but it's not a maths lesson, so I'll tell you what you need to do is afterwards, if you need to point in a direction that's 180 degrees minus your original direction. So if we go back to scratch, what we need to do is, as the tennis ball is bouncing around, we need to check whether it's touching the green first of all. So if, and then in the sensing section we've got touching colour. So if it's touching the colour, and to choose the colour we need to click on the little patch there, the blue patch, and click on the colour that we want to detect. And then what we want to do is in the motion section we're going to point in the direction of, and then we need to do a calculation. So we're going to say 180 minus the current direction, and the current direction is stored in the motion section again. If you scroll down to the bottom there's a tile for it there, so that tile gives us the current direction. So if we run that now, hopefully what we will see is that the ball now bounces off the green section. So that's bouncing off a horizontal surface, and it doesn't matter whether it's above or below the ball, the same calculation will work. What about if there is something, a vertical line that you want it to bounce off? Well, the process is fairly similar. We've got the same idea of the normal and the angle of incidence, but if you do the calculation, it turns out that what you need to turn is to face in the direction 360 minus the current direction, so 360 rather than 180. So if we go back to Scratch, then we can draw on something like, well, let's draw on a net as it's a tennis thing. So if we go to the backdrop, and let's have a grey net. So over here, I know you don't really bounce off the net, but so now what we need to do is amend our program. We need to add a bit to say if it is touching, in this case the grey colour, then what we need to do is we need to point in the direction of 360, take away the current direction, so just as I said on the slide there, and hopefully what that will do is bounce off any vertical surfaces. So you can also use this technique to bounce off other things. So if, for example, it would be a very strange tennis game, but if we had some sort of line here, it takes a bit of experimentation with other angles, but if I wanted to bounce off that line there, for example, we just need to experiment with the angle that's required to make that work. So I had a little go earlier, and it turns out that in this particular case it's 90. So I'm going to say if I'm touching, in this case, red. So what I could do to speed matters up is I could just copy that tile there. So 90. So if I run that now, we can see it bounces off the different surfaces correctly. Now, depending on what's how quickly you're moving, so if you're moving bigger steps, sometimes when you rotate, you might still be on the colour that you're detecting. So in some cases, if you find that your ball is moving quickly or your sprite is moving quickly and it gets stuck on the edge, if you just back up a little bit before you rotate, then you'll move back off the red or the green or the grey in this case. So if you reverse a little bit before you turn, you tend to reduce the number of problems that you get like that.